Hello and welcome. This is our Your Birth Imprints impacting your present day life. And if you are here or curious about this, the answer is probably yes. So I'm really glad that you're here. Jen Girardi and I are going to be walking you through an introduction to this idea and to the sequence and to imprints, and then how those imprints and the sequences intersect with other people and their imprints and sequences. Um, and yeah, that's where we are. That's what we're going to be doing today. I think it is a super fascinating thing because many of you, well, and many of you who are here, not everybody, but many of you who are here have been looking at this idea of birth imprints with me. And we've been looking at them from that individual, like what's happening in your own body. We've got to recognize that piece first. And then we can start looking at, wow, I live with this other person, or I'm interacting with this other person, or I'm going on a trip with this other person. And something different happens when we're trying to do it together. And what I notice is that when Trey and I are trying to leave the house, my imprint is this like, I don't feel an impulse, but I'm getting ready. I'm moving towards it. It's slow, but as long as I don't have to pack a bag or anything, but hey, we're just going out for the day or whatever. And if there is a specific time stamp on it, let's say we're going to leave at 2 o'clock. All right. So 2 o'clock, I am at 1:55 thinking, all right, now I need to like go ahead and finish whatever. And it's probably actually going to take me 10 minutes, but I think it's going to take me two. And 10 minutes before we're leaving, Trey's already in the car. And so he's already like out of the house. And then I'm like, oh, am I doing this wrong? And then he's like, no, 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 take your time, which is the not a good thing to say to me because now I'm going to take my time. But he doesn't really want me to take my time. He really wants me to hurry up because he's feeling his impulse already to leave. So this is just one example of how this shows up. So I wanted to start with something practical. Like this is what we're talking about. It happens all the time. And it happens in lots and lots of different situations when we have two people who are trying to do something together. And so yeah, so we're going to explore this today. And yeah, and so Jen, why don't you introduce yourself and yeah, we'll do that.
Yeah, I'm Jen Girardi. I'm a holistic family consultant with the Consciously Parenting Project, and I'm the membership facilitator as well. So I lead lots of calls for our members and provide support, answer questions, navigate the member space with everyone who chooses to join us on a longer exploration of these topics. And I have two kids. I have a 5-year-old and an 8-year-old at the moment, and of course I have a birth imprint as well. And so we're going to talk a bit about the three of our birth imprints and how they intersect with each other in helpful and not so helpful ways.
Yeah, that's a really good point too. It's like sometimes they're helpful. Sometimes we can work together really well with somebody and we don't necessarily understand why, but often it's because that part of the sequence or our birth imprints work together. So we are looking at the impact of them, and some of that impact is negative. Those are the things we want to be aware of. And some of it is also positive, and we also want to be aware of that. So thank you for that, Jen. Yeah. So as I've been sharing in our SOAR calls, the Relationship SOAR School just started, and I've been reflecting on my own journey with this and how I started, recognizing that the body had a part in all of this when I was first in therapy. And I think about how, you know, our bodies are with us all the time. And many times, especially in school, it's like, okay, we're really only concerned with, as Sir Ken Robinson says, from the chin up and slightly to one side. Like we're kind of compartmentalizing our wholeness into this thing, this part of our brain that we need to put information into. But it is happening in the context of our body. And most of our schools don't know this. If you're homeschooler, which, almost all of you are here on this particular call, we recognize there's more to growing a human than just, educating them and putting information in here, that they also have a body and they have body experiences. And it didn't really, I understood. I remember as a teacher learning about kinesthetic learners. Those are the ones that, when they're learning their multiplication tables, they need to learn to do it on the stairs when they're counting, or they need to, with in Waldorf school, they need to use the bean bags and they're throwing things. And I remember thinking, that's interesting. Those are special. Those are special learners, they need something special. But the reality is all of us need to be aware of what's happening in our bodies. And most of us don't understand what's happening in our bodies. We're not taught to look for it. We're not taught to understand the story in our nervous system. And wow, every single time I leave the house, this happens. What I was describing with leaving the house with Trey happens every single time, So when we can start to recognize there's actually patterns here. And when we are interacting with other people, we can learn what their patterns are and then work with them if they're not matched up. So, yeah, my own journey with this, I'm still learning. I am still learning and exploring my own imprints and sequences and understanding them more deeply. But really, it was when I started therapy, and it was cognitive behavioral therapy. And there was so much happening in my body that I didn't understand. And my therapist didn't understand. She didn't know how to work with it. And I didn't know even how to verbalize what was happening. But I would go into therapy, and it would be 20 or 30 minutes before I could speak every single week. My body was in a freeze, which I didn't understand at the time. And she didn't seem to understand either. And so she would just talk for the first 20 or 30 minutes until I got comfortable enough that I could speak. But that never addressed the body. It never addressed what was happening in my nervous system. And so it wasn't until I met Ray Castellino that I really started to learn about that. Actually, even before that, I met some other practitioners who were doing somatic experiencing and started learning a little bit more about the body, but it still felt like, okay, you're either talking about the body or you're talking about the mind. And we talk about mind body, but we really don't know how we work with both of them at the same time. So that's kind of what we're talking about here and in SOAR. So today we wanted to go briefly over the sequence of birth, because I want you to think about it in terms of yourself first. And then we're going to talk about imprints. Jen's going to talk about imprints, and then how the intersection happens. And we're going to encourage you to notice what's happening in your own body as we share different stories, and to share in the chat what you're noticing. If you have a situation that all of a sudden you're thinking of, oh, I've got some clarity on this, we want you to write it in the chat. Or I've got a question because I noticed this and this. So we want it to be interactive. So find the chat on whatever device you're on, and feel free to write things. I'm going to grab my baby, my doll and pelvis, which, and I've said this in a couple of the back to birth workshops, but here we are again. I really need to ask the person who cleans my office how she was born, because this baby always looks like this. Always. It's always inside the pelvis with the feet down. I'm pretty sure she was a footling breech. Really, every single time. So this is a doll. It's not a real baby. And this is a cloth pelvis. And we're going to talk about the sequence of birth, what happens when we're being born. And this is different if you have given birth yourself to the clinical stages of birth that they talk about when you are, in the hospital or whatever your situation is. It's not about the stations. It's about the sequence that shows up in our nervous system. So it's a little bit different than the clinical definitions.
And
So
I also want to note before we start going through the sequence that what we're talking about is like what's pre-programmed to be expected in our nervous systems. This is not necessarily exactly how it actually happened
nope.
for individual people. And that's kind of the point, and that's what I'll talk about after we go through this. So this is like a reference point for like absolutely everything went perfectly, which doesn't happen in reality. Even under the best of circumstances, it doesn't go this way. And that's why we have birth imprints that are relevant in our lives. So we're going to talk about that. So I want to make sure that we don't go into this with like, oh, well, what did I do wrong? Because that's not what happened to me. That's not what happened to any of us.
Right. Yeah. This is the biological expectation in our nervous systems and our bodies. Our bodies know how to be born. I was born in emergency C-section, and my first womb surround that I did was my body showing what it knew how to do that I didn't get to complete, but it's the blueprint and it's there. No matter what actually happens, this blueprint is still in our bodies, in our nervous systems. And that's really the hope, I think, and the beauty in recognizing that it probably didn't go this way. And that's okay. That's okay. It's still there. And when we can learn to reference that, then we can move through these other situations, these other imprint situations. We can move through them by referencing what our nervous system and what our bodies knows deep down. It's like imprints pile on top. And then we lose sight of the blueprint, but the blueprint is always still there. It's always still there. So, yeah. So I'm going to go back to my doll, my pelvis. So this is for most of us, and most of us were born this way with the head down, but not all babies are born this way. But the biological expectation is that the head is going to be down. And there's lots of physiological reasons why that's important. So head down, and generally the baby is turned to one side. Babies move a lot in the pelvis. And before the beginning of labor, the baby is floating and moving around and running out of room. So they're getting squeezed. And when we are in the place where labor is about to begin, then we are in the before the beginning or the preparation. We know in our bodies that labor is coming, that birth is coming. We don't necessarily understand exactly what's going to happen, but we can feel anticipation. We know it's coming. And so the head is not quite engaged, but it's moving downwards. When labor begins, and labor is ideally started by the baby. And so this is now the beginning of labor. So the baby moves down more into the pelvis. And now it is the start. Ideally, the baby initiates the labor. When the baby initiates labor, that says the baby is ready. And then that communicates with the mother. Okay, I'm ready to be born now. And then the mother's body responds. And so labor has begun. In the middle, the baby moves down more into the pelvis. And depending upon the shape of the mother's pelvis, the baby may be in a different position. So some pelvises, and these all have names that I can never remember. Sometimes the pelvis is really narrow, and so the baby ends up oriented front to back. And if the pelvis is wider, which most pelvises are, then the baby can orient with the head the long way inside the pelvis. So the baby is born with its head more in this position. The baby turns a lot when it's being born. So here we are in the middle. In the end, the baby moves through the pelvis. And the baby is an active participant in this process. Again, this is an uninterrupted birth. When the baby's head is out, the shoulders still need to come out. Depending upon the fit, the shoulders are the second biggest part. And sometimes this can be difficult. So just naming. And notice what's happening in your body as I'm doing this. So then the baby moves out. The baby will often use its legs and kick and help to be born. So this is the ending. And then ideally, the baby goes onto the mother. And this is rest and integration. So nothing else happens right now. The baby gets to orient to where the baby is. This is the space of the baby moving from the inside to the outside, from breathing water to getting the water out, which is part of that process of being born, is the squeezing of the water from the lungs, and then breathing air, feeling water on the skin, to feeling air, to having dulled lights and sounds, to having bright, depending upon where you're born. If you're born in a hospital, it's bright, unless you ask for something special. Bright and loud, because the sounds are no longer muffled. So there's a lot that has to happen in the first 5 minutes after birth, 10 minutes after birth. And ideally, the baby has at least an hour or two that no one bothers the baby and wants to do all of the things. But in most hospital settings, the baby is taken somewhere else. Sometimes there is something with the baby that's happening. Maybe the baby was early. Maybe there's a concern. And so the baby is there needs to be some intervention. But recognizing, again, this is the blueprint. So baby is on mom, and mom needs that just as much as baby does, because mom just went through a whole lot too, as all of you who have given birth know. It's not a small thing. And so we need that rest and integration time. And for many of us, that rest and integration time in our own birth was interrupted. So like you can follow that back for at least a couple of generations where we've been interrupting this right after birth. So the sequence is the preparation, then the beginning, the middle, the end, and then rest and integration. So this is the sequence, and this is the blueprint sequence. And where we have the imprints, which Jen is going to talk about next, are the places where there were interruptions in this sequence. I wanted to hand you the baby.
It's the talking baby
It is here.
instead of the talking piece.
Instead of the talking stick. Your turn. I'm going to mute myself.
All right, so I'm going to talk about my own birth first, and then both of my kids, and then a little bit about how they interact. And we can play a fun little game for the people who are watching live, or you can feel free to email us or something if you watch the recording. But as you're listening, now that you have this point of reference, as you're listening, if there are things that you notice, put them in the chat, things that you notice about, like, oh, that sounds like this part of the sequence or something. And then we'll come back to those comments. I'm very curious to see what things that you'll notice, because it's probably different than the things that we notice doing this all the time. So one of the ways that we invite people as adults to start to think about sequences, especially if you don't have a lot of information about your birth, is that we think about what happens when you're getting ready to leave the house, or what happens when you're preparing for a trip. So for me, I'm going to tell you this, and then I'm going to tell you what happened in my birth. So if I'm going on a trip, I start preparing about a week or so in advance. I make a packing list. I do any errands that need to be run. I wash laundry, things like that. So things are ready to start packing very early. And then I think that as soon as those preparations are done, I'm going to start packing, like at least several days in advance. And then I encounter this like enormous amount of resistance in myself. And it's like a physical, anytime that I try to start packing. And I just keep facing that until it feels like, oh, now I really actually have to pack because it's time to go, which I feel generally the day or night before I'm leaving. And then I start panic packing. And then I get to a point where I'm really probably only about 2/3 of the way packed. And I think, okay, I'm about done now. And then it actually takes me much longer than I think it's going to pack the last things. And then I'm generally feeling not quite ready, not settled, and rushing out the door at the last minute when I'm about to be late. And then, of course, there's no rest because I'm like rushing to catch a flight or get where I'm going on time. So my birth, I was full term. I was actually about a week after my due date. Labor started on its own, spontaneous labor. It was a very long labor prior to going to the hospital. My mom actually went to the hospital and they told her she wasn't ready, and then she walked around outside for hours. And then when she finally was admitted to the hospital, she labored there for quite a while. I'm not sure exactly how many hours, but I know it was like at least a day between when she noticed the beginning of labor and when she was admitted to the hospital. And things seemed to be progressing, no issues, but slowly. And then there came a point where she was told that labor had stalled, was not progressing anymore, and that she needed a C-section. And then she was prepped for a C-section. I was born by C-section, and I was immediately taken away by my dad to have a bath. And there's video of that part. So I've watched myself not get to rest and integrate, which is an interesting experience. And so that's what I knew from her. And she was told that it was an emergency, that it would not, that I wouldn't, come out on my own. And that's what I was told growing up, was that I didn't want to come out. And now, after years of this, of talking about birth imprints and exploring this, and also having my own children, and so learning more about birth, I learned that it's really common in a birth sequence that is proceeding on its own for there to be kind of a pause. Things are progressing and then they stop actively progressing for a little while. And that if that pause is allowed to happen, that often then after a bit, things pick up much more intensely, and then the baby is born. And I started to wonder if maybe what actually my mom and I needed was to be allowed to rest. And if maybe it's not actually that labor had stopped, but actually that we were hitting a pause, and that then things would have been continued if they were allowed to. And so I started experimenting with when I hit the point, because what happens is I hit a point where I've been sort of methodical, and then suddenly I want to be done right this second. And it's very stressful if I can't be done right this second. And I started experimenting with actually stopping and resting there before the push to finish whatever I'm doing. And found that while it's very hard for me to do that, I actually am then able to finish and feel energized instead of exhausted or stressed. So that's one example of what exploring this can offer, is a way to understand your own pattern. And it doesn't mean that I stop wanting to be finished right now, but it does give me more tools with how to interact with that place when I get there. So all of that, has been my pattern my whole life. And then I had my own kids. So my 8-year-old, my first child, labor started out very similar to mine. So he had a spontaneous labor. We had a very long, slow, pretty uneventful early labor. We had a planned hospital birth with a midwife. So we went to the hospital fairly early in labor, partly because it was quite a ways away from home, and I didn't know how quickly things would progress. So we had a lot of this long, slow, early labor in a hospital setting. And because I had a midwife, I was not given like you have to hurry it up. But there did come a point where my midwife was concerned that I was getting very tired, and she was afraid that I was going to not have enough energy to push when the time came. And so she suggested that we do something, not a C-section, but something to kind of get things moving along a little bit faster. And so I requested that we take a break first. And we had a little bit of a rest. I think she gave us about an hour that she would give us to rest and then come check again. And then when she came back, they broke my water using a hook, and that is often something that starts labor causes labor to become much more intense, which is what happened in my case. And he was born, I think, about half an hour, 45 minutes after that. So went from very slow, not intense in any way, to suddenly very intense and quick. And there was a little while in there where right at the very end where they gave me oxygen because his heart rate was starting to dip. And then he was born into his dad's and the midwife's hands, and they handed him right to me, and he was brought to my chest. And we were given space to rest, but also we're told how important it was to nurse as quickly as possible. So we were trying to, hurry that along and get him latched right away. And what I notice in his pattern is that he's very good at preparing. He actually can basically pack himself for a trip already, has been able to since he was about 6. So he's very good at preparing and understanding what he needs and getting ready. And then when it comes time to do the last little bit and actually go, like go to the bathroom, put on your socks and shoes, grab your bags, and let's go, that's when things fall apart. like flail on the floor screaming when he was a toddler. And still now he just kind of stops and needs a lot of like reminding of what needs to happen, and a lot of like, put on my socks for me, and a lot of assistance to get through that part. And then once we have made the transition, like we've left the door, then he's basically fine again. So it's just that last little bit. And it definitely helps him if I can do as much preparing as possible and make that space not compressed. Which this may come as a shock to you, but because that's the part that's very compressed for me, it's very hard for me to go slow there. I want to be like, hey, we're ready to go. Let's go. We're out now. And what he needs there is like, okay, we're ready to go. But I know we don't actually need to go for like 10 minutes. So you're like, okay, we're ready to go. Let's grab your socks. Let's walk to the door and really move slowly in that space. And when I can do that, then he doesn't get to the panic place during that transition. So then 3.5 years later, I had another one, and her birth is completely different. She, sometime between 40 and 41 weeks, she was planned to be a home birth. And then sometime between 40 and 41 weeks, she turned from head down to feet down. I don't know how she had room to do that, but she managed. And so at 41 weeks, when my midwife came to check me and see, baby still doing okay? Can we keep waiting? Do we need to, start labor or take steps towards that? She went, that's a foot. And so we then spent, so that was January 30th, or December 30th rather. So we spent New Year's Eve doing all the things to try to turn her back head down, because where I lived at the time, my midwife could not legally deliver her at home if she was breech. And I really didn't want to have to go to the hospital if I could avoid it. And so I think we actually succeeded in getting her to turn back around head down, because it felt like head. And then overnight on New Year's Eve, she turned herself feet first again. So I woke up about 5 o'clock in the morning on New Year's Day to my water breaking and labor starting. I called my midwife. My midwife came, checked me, and said, yep, she's feet first. So you've got to get bag together and head to the hospital. And I was thinking, having had one who took more than 40 hours from the start of labor, that I had all kinds of time. So I was slowly getting a bag together. I was, taking some time to connect with the 3-year-old before leaving the house, make sure that he had everything he needed with grandma. And meanwhile, contractions are getting much more intense, much more quickly. And I could tell that it was going much faster than the last one. There came a point where the midwife looked at me and looked at how I was behaving and said, you need to go now. And I started feeling an urge to push in the car halfway to the hospital. When I got to the hospital and had to go, I had not pre-registered or anything, so I had to go through the whole security thing and all the things. And I could no longer walk because the contractions were so intense and so fast. And I was trying very hard not to push, because I knew that was not, I was not in the right environment yet. So I have a timestamp on my security photo. Maddie was born less than 10 minutes from the from the minute I walked in the hospital. So I was pushed in a wheelchair to the maternity area. They tried to hand me paperwork to fill out, and my midwife went, she's going to have a baby right here in the lobby while she fills out paperwork. So they rushed me inside. The on-call doctor came running in. I think there were 6 or 7 other people who also ran in because they didn't know how much of an emergency it was, since I'm just like walking in, people are screaming, hey, she needs to push the baby's breech and run, and they didn't know what was really happening. So they're yelling about preparing surgery. Their idea was that it's not safe to have breech babies vaginally, and that I needed to have a C-section. And Maddie didn't give them the chance because she was on her way. So she was born very fast, and then was pulled away, not out of the room, but to an exam table, and the nurse and the doctor were checking her, because it can be dangerous to be born breech vaginally. Things can go wrong. So they wanted to check her, and they again weren't sure how much of an emergency this was. It was maybe 5 minutes. It was not a long time that they were checking her, and then she was handed to me. And because I had learned all these things about birth sequence between my kids, in Maddie's case, I didn't rush her to nurse, and she actually showed the story of her birth on my chest. I was batting away people who were trying to get her to come help latch and tell me that her crying was a bad thing. No, she's just telling us. And so she had the opportunity to show this whole sequence, and then nurse. And then she was separated from me, sort of, because I didn't deliver the placenta as expected. And so they had to give me Pitocin then after the birth. So it didn't go into her system, but and do some compressions and things to get me to birth the placenta. And it was quite painful, and she was also kind of in the way of it right here. And so they had her dad hold her next to the bed. So she was in loving arms and right next to me. And this is interesting in part because later, when I told her birth story, at that part, she would make the groaning noise that I made while they were pushing the placenta out, that she had heard in that moment. And her sequence is that she does nothing to prepare to go until you tell her it's time to walk out the door. And then she goes very fast and grabs whatever stuff she wants, gathers snacks, puts on her socks and shoes in like 5 minutes. And then she gets kind of briefly disoriented, but actually doesn't go well if I try to help her. She actually needs to have a minute where she's left alone. And then she kind of figures it out, and then she comes right along, and once we make the transition, she just goes along pretty calmly. I also have noticed that when she's upset, she needs to like go cry over there for like a minute before she will allow me to connect with her. And so you can imagine that for me, in some ways, this sequence is a lot easier, at least the actual leaving part, because she wants to leave fast and so do I. And that's easy for me. The preparing part is harder because I get antsy. I'm like, come on, like I told you to go pack. Why are you not ready to go? And you can also probably see how she and her brother my two kids' patterns uh, can be hard to navigate both at the same time because he's wanting to leave very slowly while she's wanting to leave very fast. So what I've learned to do when things are all going well, which is not every time we leave the house by any means, but when things are all going well and the stars all align, I tell them, I tell my older one, okay, go get ready. And he'll go get ready. And I'll get ready. And I'll prepare whatever part of the younger one stuff I need to get ready. And then I'll tell them both, okay, it's time to go. And then while she then suddenly is like, oh, I'm going to go get ready, he gets to take that time to slowly start moving towards the door so that they both arrive at the door at the same time. And we can all then leave together. And then, and also it has become a bit of a ritual for all of us that once we get out the door and I lock it behind us, so we have made the transition, we're not still leaving, that then we all kind of, okay, before we go any further and take just a couple of breaths there to kind of settle ourselves.
Wow. It's like, wow, these are the things that are happening all the time. And as parents, or partners or friends or whatever, we look at what the other person is doing and we're like, why are you doing it that way? Maddie, it's time to get ready. Like, you have to prepare because we're coming from our own imprints. This is what we know in our bodies needs to happen. And when we have someone with a different imprint, where there's a different need, there's a different felt sense, then it feels like they're doing it wrong. Oh gosh, if you would just start getting ready now, then I will feel better. And this would go so much smoother, but that's not the imprint in Maddie's nervous system. And, at the place where, when your son is pausing and he's not ready to do the next thing, that's your impulse is we have to push, we have to just go right through this. And that's not what he needs. So you don't have to Jen, you had such a beautiful story of understanding your own imprints, understanding your kids' imprints. And, you've been working with this for a long time. And that's great. The more you can understand, the better, the easier it becomes. And at the same time, just noticing, like with my husband, Trey, we asked his mother about his birth, and the only information she's given us is that she was in labor for 18 months, which, okay, not very helpful in terms of information. So I don't know what happened, and I've tried to get the information, but I can tell you what I see every single time. And I can tell you that if I say, hey, can you just wait here with me? That's not going over well because he's already got his impulse and he wants to go. It's like, reminds me of one of the first times I really started seeing this imprint pattern with him is that we went on a cruise. It was the first time that we had traveled together. We arrive in the port. I don't even remember where we were. And Trey is like completely dressed. He's got his stuff all ready to go. And he's like, let's go. And I'm like, wait, we don't have a plan. I haven't had breakfast. I'm not ready to go yet. And it was such a stark thing to be like, no, if I go right now, I'm going to be really pissed off because I'm not ready. I have a long preparation phase like Jen does. My birth is very similar, and yet there are parts that are different in mine. Yeah, I don't have that rest piece in mine that you describe. But like recognizing these places where, whoa, wow, okay, what do I need? What does this other person need? And then how do we negotiate that? So really, we've gotten to the point where Trey just goes to the car and I just say, all right, and I'm going to take the time that I need to finish getting ready so that I have my own impulse. And I had an experience when I was just in California of really being ready to go. So the person that I was traveling with also has a similar imprint, and she normally we're ready at the same time, but for this on this particular thing, we are getting out of our Airbnb. She wanted to go back and wipe all of the kitchen counters down. So I'd been ready for 5 minutes already. So I stood in the doorway and I thought, wow, this is weird. Like, I think I'm ready to go. I think normally I just am kind of propelled through, like, it's time, I have to go. But I actually walked through the doorway and I was like, no, I'm ready. I'm ready to go. So I'm still learning about my imprints and what I need, and and how it shows up with different people in different relationships. And like in that space, there was like she wasn't ready. So I got to be in my own timing, which is different than when my husband's already in the car, because then I already feel like I'm behind. I got to hurry up and do the thing, and then I'm running out the door and I may or may not actually be ready, but I need to go, which is my birth. I wasn't quite ready. Right. So I just want to say, you don't need to understand exactly what happened to you, exactly what happened to somebody else. But notice what shows up. Notice when you are, trying to get out the door with someone. Notice when you are trying to get out the door. Maybe the other someone is your dog, like just thinking about noticing what happens. How do you feel? Do you feel a part where something speeds up? Do you feel a part where you just want to like stop? I have that same thing that happens when I'm trying to pack. Like I did a video on one on my last trip. I don't remember where that video ended up, but I literally did a video and I was like maybe halfway done packing. And I was like, I'm done. I don't want to do this anymore. Except we have to leave. We have to vacate this Airbnb. But I was like, it feels like I should be almost done. But like looking around, I was maybe halfway done. It's just like, why? So, and the people that you love, the people you're in relationship with, all have their own imprints, their own sequence that shows up and that collides or that works really well together. Like my oldest son has a very similar birth imprint. It's really easy for me to travel with him. He packs about the same time that I do. He's ready to go about the same time I am. His timing is a little bit slower, which is good for me. So like it's easy to do that with him. And Josh has a very slow, does he even know that we're leaving kind of a pace. And so that's frustrating for me with my fast pace. So just noticing. So I'm curious for those of you who are here listening, and we can also unmute you and spotlight you. And if you want to talk or share something, or if you want to write something, are there spaces that you notice with someone that you love, someone that you're in relationship with? And maybe it's even like, with someone that you're not living with now. It could be your kids who are on their own now or your grandkids. But are there any of these places in the sequence? So think about it: preparation, beginning, middle, end, and the after. Are there places you struggle in that sequence? And are there places that you see, ooh, that comes together and it's a little sticky? Like it's always that ending that's really sticky, or somewhere at the beginning it's sticky. So I'm just curious what you all are hearing and noticing. Sophia, can I spotlight you so you can talk? Okay, add spotlight. All right, Sophia, just unmute yourself.
Okay, well, watching that baby that you had there being born. Wait, it says the host has I don't know. Am I
You're
supposed to
good.
click this I have a box here that's talking to me. Um, that whole birth, watching that baby being born, there was a part of me, and I don't know whether it had to do, I think it had to do part with feelings that were coming up for me about my birth, which I don't know a heck of a lot about. But definitely stuff about Isabel's birth too.
Yeah.
Um, but I guess what I'm trying to understand is, so I hear Jen talking about the different births, her son's birth, her daughter's birth, her birth. And I'm trying to figure out how she figured out how to make it work. So I know that, for instance, and this is probably like the best example I can give. So when my daughter is getting ready to go to work, she inevitably is like running out the door because she hasn't given herself enough time to really get ready and leave calmly, which is, I go everywhere and I'm like 15 to 10 minutes early. That's just always how it's been with me. And so, and I literally feel, and I'm not the one leaving the house and I'm not the one going to work, but I feel panicked about it until she's gone. And then it's like, okay. And I know she's going to get there on time because she, she leaves with enough time, but it's like, it's just, so I'm trying to figure out, and she was a preemie. She was born at 27 weeks. But she was a natural birth. They did whisk her away, so I did not get to have her on me at any point. They held her above me, and then whisked her away to the NICU. So I guess I'm trying to figure out, beginning, and I was in labor for more than pretty much 7 days, because I started labor like on Saturday, and she wasn't born till the following Friday in the evening. Um, and then it was a rush um, to get me into, I don't know if they thought she was going to have to be um, pulled out or whatever, but I was already 10 centimeters dilated by the time the doctor showed up, because they couldn't find the doctor. It was a Friday night. He was probably out to dinner. He was on a date. And I literally got into the delivery room. It was an operating room, at 9:40, and she was born at 10:03.
Fast. That's really fast.
Yeah.
Yeah. What was that speed like for you when she was born?
I mean, I guess I wasn't surprised because I had been in labor for so long. It was just like, okay, she's ready. And she came.
Mhm.
And then again, I think the doctor was in a rush and wanted to get back to his dinner. So, um, like a few minutes after she was born, he was like, I'm gonna have to pull the placenta out.
Oh God.
Yeah. And I'm like, really? And he's like, yeah. And at that point, I had her natural. I didn't have to have an epidural, but an anesthesiologist came in and was going to give me an epidural. I'm like, for what? I said, I already had my kid. Um, and the doctor was like, well, I have to, go in there and pull out it because it's a preemie, it's a sticky placenta. And I'm like, I don't know who you think you're dealing with, but I've read up on all of this stuff, and that's a bunch of baloney. Um, but we made an agreement that I would push and he could go in there, but if I told him to get out, he had to get out. And I had my doula with me, and after I think like two pushes, it was like the final one, and she was like, Sophia, if you don't push it out now, he's going to go in there. And I literally closed my eyes and imagined the placenta just like, getting, and I was able to push it out. So um, that was the worst part. Her
Mm.
birth was, I mean, she was only 2 pounds, 12 ounces. There,
Mhm,
and I
mhm,
was like
mhm.
pushing out a peanut, I guess. I
Yeah.
guess the other things around her birth, though, was that she was supposed to be a home birth.
Mhm.
And because it was 27 weeks, so I was really preparing for a home birth. I had no idea that I was going to end up in the hospital. And my midwife never even came. She never even showed up because she was like, it's going to be in my backup doctor's hands. And, you know, months later, she apologized because she realized, oh, I should have shown up, but she didn't. Um, but yeah, I guess, that part of it was difficult too, having the expectation of having it at home
Mhm.
and then it being, but I've always said that I think it was the best possible scenario, like as close to having it at home as it could have been, because they really left me alone with my doula and my sister. They didn't bother me until I was like 10 centimeters. Um, like I said, it was back and forth the whole week. Um, that whole week going back and forth. Saturday, I went to see my midwife because there was blood. There was
Mm.
a little bit of blood. So I went to see her on Saturday and she's like, oh, you're kind of effaced. So I had her, I said, can I just stay home? She goes, yeah, but on Monday, I want you to go in to see the doctors. They sent me to the hospital to monitor me a little bit, and then they sent me home. And then they sent me back. I ended up in the hospital again on Wednesday. They sent me home Thursday again after spending all of Wednesday in the hospital because they stopped I was having contractions, but they had stopped the contractions. Um, but then Friday morning, I was back in the hospital again, and I was effaced, and I had broken my water that
Uh,
morning,
uh-huh.
so
So
it
let
was
me
like.
let me come back to your question, because you were asking about, okay, this is what's happening in present time. This is that okay, I see her imprint. I see what she does, and you feel panic. That's part of why I was asking what
Oh,
you were feeling when she was born, like that really that fast part, because it's very different than what you understand, what you see from your own imprints. Like your felt sense is you're going to be early, 10 to 15 minutes. You're ready. There's slow, there's no rush. And then you have this other imprint that has all this rush. So your question was to Jen, and
yeah.
like, Jen, how did you figure this out? How did you figure this out? So anything you want to say about that?
Um, I think the most important thing I can say about that is that I didn't figure it out in one day. This is a process of experimenting with trying different things in present time as I gained more awareness. So there's like, I would say actually there's sort of three pieces. There's a piece of gaining more awareness and understanding of all of the different patterns that are in play. There's experimenting with what I actually do or don't do, and when and how, and seeing what works well and what doesn't work well. And a part of that is naming what I'm noticing to my kids. I'm noticing that every time I try to get you to go out the door, that suddenly you realize you didn't pack your bag yet. Naming those things, not necessarily saying it that I notice it being about birth, just noticing those patterns. And then the third piece is doing my own work, not in the moments where I'm trying to do the transition, but in other times. meaning like coming to these kinds of spaces and naming all of those pieces, and a lot of differentiation. Is this about my pattern? Is this about their pattern? Is it my responsibility? Which my kids are young, so the answer is often yes. Isabel is older, so sometimes there might be a piece of differentiation of like, I'm her mom and I'm used to being responsible for these things, but it's not my responsibility anymore. And so there's a little bit of a different question of, is there a way I can be supportive that would be helpful? Or is it this about me and my reaction, and what I actually need to do is take care of myself?
Yeah, that makes sense. I think I need to take care of myself. That's what I'm taking away right now. I think I just need to take care of myself. But I guess, I mean, I know you've been studying this for a really long time, so I get it. It's not. I guess what I'm also trying to understand is how it relates to, so for instance, you're saying, Maddie waits till the last minute. You tell her it's time to go, and she rushes around getting everything ready, and then she's out the door. So is there a piece of the story that you told us about her birth that fits with? I guess that's, what I'm sort of trying to understand.
The connection that I see, and you might see different connections, because we all see different layers, but the connection that I see is that she was post-term, and then she went from like no signs of labor approaching whatsoever to born in 3 hours. So she waited until it was late. We were like, where you coming? And then but she did it herself. She wasn't induced or anything. So she on her own went really fast. And that's an important difference between her really fast and my really fast. That there's like a real sense of power and ownership in her really fast because it's hers.
She came really fast in the way that she wanted to come, because she, for whatever reason, wanted to come foot first, feet first,
Mm-hmm.
So she did it her way. That's what she's doing. She's doing it her way. She's staying connected to herself in that transition out. She stayed in connection with herself, and then she's doing it every time she's leaving. It's at her pace, her rhythm, which is different than Jen's, where someone pulled her out.
And the differentiation piece there in Maddie's case is that because she's doing it her way, and she does have a very intact sequence, it's just a different pace. So where the conflict comes is if I try to interrupt the sequence in present time to make it go more like mine. And if I kind of leave it alone, it's going to go without really any conflict generally. And so the differentiation piece is trusting that her sequence is going to work for her. And that if I feel anxious about her not having started preparing yet, that I need to take care of my anxiety instead of trying to make her prepare earlier.
Which sounds very similar to what I need to do with Isabel. Not.
And it's also a lot easier to say than it is to actually do it.
Yeah, that's the whole thing, because it's like, it's totally a whole body thing. It's like, I mean, I'm like, why am I feeling like why does this feel so bad to me when has nothing to do with me, supposedly? I guess my other question too is, I know you say we don't have to know exactly what our birth story is, which I've gotten bits and pieces about what mine is. I know that my mom started labor early on a Sunday morning, and I wasn't born till like 8:03 or something like that in the evening. Um, but she was also put to sleep. It was back then when they would put them
Twilight sleep.
under.
Mhm.
Yeah, so she doesn't have any idea what happened with
Mhm.
me. But I
Mhm.
would also guess that it also means that I probably was drugged as well.
Mhm. Yep. And it's likely that forceps were used because
Mm,
the mom is not an active participant, so the mom can't push, and the mother's system is under the medication, and then the baby can't help move out. And so usually forceps are used to pull the
mm.
baby out. So there's information. If you know that much, I can help you put the rest of it together.
Okay.
Yeah. Yeah. Because it's they go together. Yeah. Yeah. And in SOAR, we're going to be helping you explore that. Yeah. Yeah.
Sounds good.
I was just gonna say that's a really good transition to we can spend a whole year exploring these patterns,
I'm going to remove the
taking
spotlight
our
from you, Sophia.
time,
Yep.
getting real into them.
Mm-hmm. And exploring what's showing up in your body and how that's showing up in your relationships. Isn't this fun? Like, it's so interesting. What does show up? What are the things that are right there in plain sight that we didn't understand or we didn't know what we were looking at because no one said, "Oh, that's what that is. Oh, that's why that happens. Oh, here's another way you could work with that." It's fascinating. And so I'm really excited. I know two of you are already in. I know the third wants to be. So um, we are just welcoming anyone who wants to participate in SOAR. If you feel the call to be part of it, reach out and let us know. And we will help you find your way in. Yeah.
And in SOAR, we're talking about all kinds of relationships. You can be exploring your relationship with yourself, your own imprints, how you move through the world, how you can help yourself have an easier time moving through the world. We're talking about partner relationships. We're talking about, you and your own parents. We're talking about you and your children if you have children. That was the lens today because those are the imprints that I came to this work through. But you don't have to have children or children who still are at home in order to explore this. This is relevant in all kinds of relationships. You know,
Colleagues, um,
mm-hmm.
friends, it's endless, but it's so fun and interesting to see and to learn, especially if it's someone that you already know, whether it's your child or a friend or your partner, to start seeing them in different ways. And seeing different ways that you can respond, but even just your own relationship with yourself, understanding more about your own imprints can help you so much to understand who you are, how you show up, and to release judgment from yourself about why do I always do this? Why do I always get stuck here? Why does this always happen? Oh, it's my imprints. Okay, if I can differentiate that a little bit, then I can do it differently.
And I find it really helps to bring a sense of fun and play and curiosity and humor to
Yes.
those kinds of sticky situations, instead of going, oh, I'm so frustrated. Why is it always so hard? To kind of be like, what is this about? And bring that kind of amusement to it, which
Oh,
makes
here I
things
go
go
again.
easier.
I'm doing that thing. I'm staring at my suitcase and it's half packed and I feel like I should be done, but I'm not done. Like being able to bring some lightness to it, and and some acceptance of yourself is really beautiful.
Will you be listening? Will you be listing the sequence of normal birth somewhere?
Oh yeah.
In SOAR, we will definitely be going through that
Yeah, that's
again.
next month.
Yeah,
That's
in
our
more
content
detail.
next month. We're gonna really dive deep into it. So yeah. My baby and my pelvis will be back next month. So that'll be great. Yeah. Any other questions before we go? Or we're a bit over our time, but yeah, Jeanette.
Just an orienting question, like today is not part of the SOAR program. It's, do I
So
get that right?
it is, but it isn't. It's like we're including this. You'll have access to this, but this is also available to anybody who wants to see it. So this will go on YouTube, unless someone objects, like Sophia, because you asked a lot of questions. Then we can edit you out. But it's meant to be out. So if you have someone that you think would be interested in hearing this, and you're welcome to share. So this is an introduction. This is something that we're talking about in SOAR. We're going to go way deeper into it. So, but I think it's helpful, even if you're in SOAR already, to hear this information now. It's just, I don't think you can hear it too many times. Every time you hear it,
Okay.
you're going to see something else, hear something else, recognize or feel something else. So, yeah. Did that answer your question,
I still,
Jeanette?
yes, thanks.
Thank you.
But I really enjoyed it. Like, wow. I really feel the depth of everything that we're gonna learn this year. Yeah.
Awesome.
And I'm
Thank-
very excited. Yeah.
Me too. Thank you, Jeanette. All right. Any other questions before we end? Okay. Thank you all so much for being here. And if you watch later, thank you for watching. Let us know questions if they come up later. If you have questions about SOAR, let us know. And we will hopefully see you again very soon. Lots of love to all of you. Have a good rest of your day. Bye.
Bye.